Frank Peasy, aisle 1. Spilled milk.
I think the mayor is calling out Frank Peasy. I don't know why. Okay, so I think we're ready to begin. This is also being broadcasted live. This is very much an impromptu meeting. What that means is there's not necessarily a set schedule. We have items that we want to cover and discuss. We have with us an economist from the State Department of Workforce Services, Mark Nold, and we have various other community members and leaders here at the table. This discussion will revolve largely around our workforce and our workforce education and training. And so to begin with, Mark and I, we were engaged, not engaged in the senses of, how embarrassing. I said we were just live and look at that. So we wanted to understand better our community compared to the rest of the state. And so reached out to Department of Workforce Services. They put me in touch with Mark Nold. He's one of their, how would you say, pillar economists there at the state, and worked on this economic workforce study to help better understand across many different areas, 5 different categories and more, how our area differs from our neighboring areas, our neighboring counties, and how our neighboring counties and our county differs from the Wasatch Front and other counties in Utah. And so originally this was a carbon and Emery study. Eventually Mark took it across all the counties in Utah, and we have some good data that can help us make some decisions from. So I guess to begin with, Mark, I'm going to turn the time over to you. You've got a presentation. I'm going to turn the lights down a little bit so that we can see it better here in the group. And as you go along, panelists, if you have questions for Mark, you'll see it on the screens in front of you. Feel free to interrupt and ask. In the beginning, it'll be a panel discussion, and then towards the end, we'll open it up for a group forum discussion.
Okay, do you have the PowerPoint we can put up? Okay. Again, my name is Mark Nold. I'm a supervising economist with the Utah Department of Workforce Services. I'm in the Ivory Tower up in Salt Lake City. In terms of Workforce Services, the administration building there, Workforce Services has offices throughout the state. I've been there 28 years. Saw a lot of things come and go in the state of Utah and followed the economy and so on. I want to start out, I guess, showing just some quick picture of the state of Utah itself, because like establish a standard or a baseline to bounce the rural communities off of. So you can see here, this is the Utah job count from just a picture of it from 1980 up to the present. You can see that it is, you know, the trend here is upward with a couple of hiccups in there. That first dip there around the year 2000 is the .com downturn, and then you can see the job setbacks there with the Great Recession around the year 2008. Thing to notice is, again though, that you have this growing, continuously growing pretty much state. This job count is growing. In fact, if you go from 1980 to the year 2000, based upon employment, the Utah economy doubled. In just 20 years, the Utah economy doubled. Now from the year 2000 till now, it's up about 40%, but we have 2 recessions that were in there. So we've got 17 years, only of which 11 of those had job growth. So basically in 11 years, we've also increased the economy by 40% here in the state of Utah. This is the rate of job growth. This is the red one is the Utah, the blue one is the United States job growth rate. 2 things basically to notice is that the ups and downs seem to be very much in parallel. In other words, the United States economy basically drives the whole thing. It's very rare for Utah to be doing something economically different than what is happening at the greater national level. There's a couple of periods here and there where you could see something there around 1990. The United States had some job loss there in a recession, and Utah slowed down but didn't lose job. But generally, Utah economy, the pattern of growth up and down and so on, follows the United States pattern. The other thing to notice, though, our general position in relation to the United States economy, though, is that we're much higher oftentimes in the job growth picture. So when things are going well in the United States economy, Utah, it's like, you know, the ocean is rising and this particular wave over here is higher than the rest of the ocean. Oh, that's Utah. That seems to be where our position, natural position, is throughout time. Just to make a point on the next slide, when you look at a business cycle, it has ups and downs where you have time going across the bottom and some measurement of the economy is going upward there. Let's call it employment. And you have that peak there on the left. And then you have this contraction, and that's usually a loss of jobs, which is usually a recessionary period until you hit the bottom, which is the trough. And then you start growing the economy again. So now you're into an expansion period, which has basically two components to it. The recovery component is getting back to peak employment. So the economy was here, it fell, and then it's back to where it was at its peak. And then there's growth over and above the previous peak, which we call prosperity. Now, what I'm doing with the next slide is measuring every state in the nation in relation to their peak employment into the recession and where they are now in terms of growth over and above their peak employment prior to the Great Recession. And of all the states, we had the most job growth over and above where everybody, or where the states were prior to the setback of the Great Recession. Every state had some employment loss during the Great Recession. We did too. In fact, we were a little higher than the national average in our job loss, but that was largely because I called it guilt by association. We were too close to the housing bubbles. California, Arizona, Nevada, it's not that far to Utah to be, having gotten swept up in that to a certain degree. But coming out of it, we had this strong job growth. We've had it for quite a long time. Our long-term average is 3% job growth. We've been doing about 3.5% for the last 3 years and counting. And so the question is why? Why does Utah do what it does while many other states have some setbacks or don't grow the way it is? And it's really the foundation is this, the population tree. What you do with a population age tree like this is you put the boys on the left and the girls on the right, and you build 5-year age increments and you populate it. And you can see that the United States, for comparison, is on the right-hand side. Now, understand that the Utah is just 1% of that big tree over there on the right, but this is who we are, though. This is our population age tree. And you can see that on the United States area, I've highlighted in red the areas that dominate the labor force. So you can see the presence there of the baby boomers over in the United States tree. On the other hand, though, the Utah tree is this, Christmas tree or cone-shaped. It's fatter at the bottom than it is at the top, whereas on the United States one, it's basically fatter at the top than it is at the bottom. So, in other words, in the United States, the baby boom generation did not really reproduce itself. And in Utah, we have large family sizes here in the state of Utah. So not only did the baby boom generation reproduce itself with an echo boom, and then that reproduced itself, and then some. I call that the reverberation boom. But you can see that there's this cone shape to our tree, and as that population ages, it comes into the labor force and needs to get jobs and expands the economy. So this base foundation of population is what makes Utah this quote-unquote growing economic machine that I've showed on some of the prior slides. Just a quick thing to note here, this would be a whole nother subject and so on, but there's some, I've highlighted now what the future holds really, and again, you can see that there's a wide base here for Utah, and there's more economic growth that's coming as that base ages. But there's some trouble, so to speak, on the United States side where without in-migration or some other kind of a situation, the labor force actually will start to contract as time goes forward at the United States level because of the low amount of population there in that base.
Mark, I was just going to throw out a few comments from this Western Pathways Conference that was just last week. In regards to some of what you're showing us right now, they actually said in about 10 years, 50% of our labor force will be made up of millennials. And so that's kind of, you know, the visual that we're getting here, that's reflective of what they were saying. And they also mentioned that Utah, which you can see with these two images, has higher immigration rates of workers. When I say immigration, I'm not talking south of the border, I'm talking, you know, people from other states moving to Utah to work. And so that is definitely depicted by these images.
Yeah, and you know, going forward with that United States to overcome that weakness there on the bottom and keep the economy either the same size or growing, one of two things basically has to happen, and it will probably be some combination of both, is there will have to be some in-migration, controlled in-migration. Hopefully that occurs from other countries coming here to take advantage of the economy, and or artificial intelligence and robots will help fill some of this labor void also. Jake had just mentioned about the net in-migration. So the prior slide showed what the foundation of Utah's economic growth is. Now you either have it or you turbocharge it with additional in-migration coming in from other states. And you can see here, this is a picture and a pattern of the Utah net in-migration coming in. You can see that it slowed down during the Great Recession. But we generally have a trend of in-migration coming in from other states. So that's an additional factor on the economic growth. And that trend of other states coming this way, as I see it, it's will continue and is a long-term trend. You can look at this picture and see that this is showing population change by state from 1990 to the year 2017. And the three fastest growing states are in red there: Nevada, Utah, and Arizona. Again, I tell a story here as if you go back through the entire history of the United States, most of its foundation economically was the Industrial Revolution. And what they did there was basically kind of come in off the farms and go into the cities, get into the factories, make these big physical products that needed to be moved around the country. And so oceans worked well, rivers worked well, flat lands worked well, and lakes worked well to move things, but mountains did not. Mountains were not an attractive part, so to speak, geographically of the Industrial Revolution. But that started to break down with superhighways and super airplanes and big trucks and so on after World War II. And then you also now have a parallel economy that has developed in the technology economy. And the technology economy could care less about geography. So you can make the argument that what is one of the most attractive parts of the United States has been underdeveloped for most of this country's development. And now the economic shackles, so to speak, have been released. And don't underestimate those red changes based upon something as simple as air conditioning. You know, we've grown up with it and don't even think about it, but that also opened the door also for its development to come into this part of the country. But the moral of the story as I'm looking here is you have an underdeveloped part of the country that is aesthetically beautiful and pleasing and is desirable for people to come to, and that is a long-term trend, and you can see that in that prior in-migration picture. Now, having set the stage for what is happening in the greater part of Utah, Utah is somewhat a tale of two economies within the state. 82% of the entire state's employment is from Provo to Ogden. It's basically along the Wasatch Front. This picture shows rural Utah job growth. I don't know how well you can see those counties at the bottom, but I'm not counting like Logan or St. George. I'm not considering them to be rural in this respect. But you can see that the general trend in the flow of the state of Utah and its economic growth, that it's largely pulling along rural Utah also. But there are, that Great Recession setback lasted longer in the rural communities. And where I showed a slide earlier, over and above peak employment in the state of Utah was 18%. The rural Utah job count is only 3% over and above previous peak employment, which was around the year 2009. So there is the greater Utah economy does move along. It pulls along the rural economies, but it doesn't mean the rural economies get moved along at the same rate of speed or the same rate of expansion that the greater Utah economy does. In fact, here is each of the particular counties in terms of their pre-recession employment as of right now based upon that pre-recession high. And you can see that there's 6, 8, 9, 10, 11 counties there at the bottom that have fewer jobs now than they did before the recession. And unfortunately, Carbon and Emery are on that list. I've highlighted them in red. And there's other rural communities up above that are in the positive areas, Sanpete, Ridge, Beaver, Sevier, Kane, Millard, Iron, and so on. So that's where you get the cumulative overall rural community gains. But even in the rural communities, what we would call the rural communities, there is some gains and there are some setbacks. Because the greater Utah economy is growing faster than the rural Utah economies, the rural Utah's percent of the Utah employment base is declining. You can see prior to that upswing there towards the Great Recessionary period, that it was around 9%, it peaked out around 10%, and now it's down to around 8.5% of all of Utah employment is in the rural communities. So I guess oftentimes if you feel that you may have dialogue with the greater Utah people, legislators, whatever, the economic people and so on, you're speaking, so to speak, with an 8.5% voice of the total. And so sometimes if you sit around and maybe feel frustrated that you don't get heard the way you would like to and so on, well, this might be the foundation of where that, economically and employment-wise, where that comes from. If you want to look at the various rural areas as a percent of Utah rural employment, the largest community we call the Uinta Basin. Iron County is there, Sanpete and Sevier, and then I've taken the two, Carbon and Emery counties, and they're highlighted there in the red. Let's go back to those population age tree. Again, here's the Utah one on the left. Over on the right is Utah's rural population. I did not include Iron County in this one just because anytime you have a community like Logan, or in this case Cedar City, that has a large university in it, you will get a very wide spike going out there at your 20 to 24-year-olds that doesn't last, so to speak. It doesn't age through your economy and stick around. It's always there, but it's being filled temporarily by new faces moving through and moving back out. But again, you've got the wide base, but then you have this pattern of around 20 to 30-year age. There's this, seems to be this shrinking, which is probably in and of itself some sort of out-migration that goes on. And then there's, in the 30 to 40 range, there's a width again. The one I can't answer, I have a surprise over, is what's going on between 40 and 50. It thins out again, and then you could see a baby boom, an older population there in the upper part of the red. So I think, this would speak that those two, that one in the 50s there, I think maybe if we go back through, if I looked harder back through time, it's probably some cumulative economic setback that occurred 10, 15, 20 years ago that may have drove some of those out when 40-year-olds, so to speak, out, 50-year-olds out when they were younger, and didn't come back, so to speak. That's about all I could make speculation on as to why it kind of has that wavy look there. But I think the things to take from it and so on is that youthful population, when they get into that 20-year-old age and so on, they have a tendency of possibly moving on out to something else. This one takes a little bit of explanation, but its goal, or what is tried to be shown here, is economic diversity. High economic diversity would be at the top, and low economic diversity is working here at the bottom of the slide. The horizontal is a 5-year employment change. You can see there's a 0 line. There's also employment losses that would go off to the left. There are employment gains that would go off to the right. Economic diversity is being measured on the vertical scale from 0 to 1. I'm bouncing it off of, this is really being bounced off of the United States economy. So if you break the United States economy into a whole bunch of industrial employment distributions, employment distribution by various industries, if your area is distributed exactly like that, you would be a 1. The less your economy is distributed like that, the more you would move down on the scale. And the concept is kind of like not putting all your eggs in one basket is I guess the best way to summarize what's trying to be spoken or thought of here with these economic diversity indexes. And you can see that if you put a line of fit upon here, that it would slope from bottom left to upper right. And you can see a common theme here that's basically what it's saying is the more economic diversity you have, the more economic growth you will have. And the less economic diversity you have, oftentimes you can get caught in lower employment changes or actual economic setbacks if those setbacks occur in the industries where your eggs are in those baskets. I know if I'd have done this slide, well, I did this slide, let's say 5 years ago or so, and with the oil boom, and Duchesne, instead of being negative, were so far, well, they were off the chart. They had like 80% job growth that I would have put arrows and said, they're out there, you know. I couldn't put it all on the chart, but with an oil setback, boom, they can quickly come back into this declining employment range. But again, one of the themes or stories, or why do certain areas have a consistency of struggling, so to speak, when other areas don't? And oftentimes it's just the foundation of the base employment and what the natural endowments of the area are. Industries grow and build with what's naturally endowed. Your natural endowment here was coal. And so it's very natural for that industry to grow here, to take advantage of what is here as a natural endowment. But there are other things that aren't here and don't work very well here. And it's very difficult to artificially try and make an IT company come here and set up shop if they don't feel that this is where is a favorable place for them to come and do business. This is setting up for the next slide. This is the unemployment rates. The blue is the United States, the red is Utah, and again you can see that there's continuity of movement, but usually the Utah unemployment rate is lower than the national rate, which would make sense if our job growth is generally higher than the United States job growth. But on the next slide, what I'm going to do is take the Utah economy and its unemployment rate on a monthly basis and compare, see what every county's unemployment rate is also. So if a county's unemployment rate is 4 and the Utah rate is 3, I'm going to subtract 4 from 3 and give that county 1. And I'm basically taking the difference between what the county's unemployment rate is, over or higher or lower or equal to the Utah rate. Make note of it and then do it for every month between the year 2000 and now, and then sum up what that is. And basically what I've done here is counties with persistently high unemployment rate are going to show up on the top part of this slide here. So all the counties go from left to right across here in alphabetical order. And you can see Carbon, Emery, Paiute, Grand, Wayne, San Juan, and Garfield across a long period of time have consistently higher unemployment rates than does the statewide average. Carbon County itself, job count. You can see growth from '89 moving all the way up basically to a high point there right before the Great Recession in the year 2000. You can see a little setback there in the .com in the early 2000s and so on. But since the Great Recession, as I pointed earlier with one of the slides, that Carbon and Emery have had employment setbacks since then. And here's a picture of it. The interesting thing is this is the Carbon County mining job count. And you can see where on the prior slide there was a peak there around 2009. Well, you can see that peak also shown up here. But the interesting thing is here from the year '89 through 2004, you can see a downward sloping in employment. But yet over here on this one, you see an upward slope. So while the economy or the county was losing coal mining jobs, that didn't mean it had to lose jobs overall, which they didn't. So I evaluated this, what other industries were countering it, so to speak, and it was a very broad range of them. There was many of the other industries were adding employment and increasing, while the coal mining was actually on a downward trend at that time. But that doesn't seem to be what is occurring, obviously not, and something has changed, so to speak, after the Great Recession that is not showing the other industries countering the coal industry declines. Yeah?
Those countering jobs, is this a job count or is it an income per job?
This is a job count.
So in other words, a declining, high-paying mining job really detracts from the economy, even though you've got lower-paying service jobs.
Sure. Yes. This is nothing more than head counts in jobs, not necessarily the quality or the income or the wages that are behind those jobs.
We're going to actually discuss that a little bit later.
For that 2009 through 17 setback, you can see the industries here that and the quantities of employment loss. Ones that have picked up are the professional and technical services, business services, and healthcare. It would be nicer to have more in the professional and technical, but it's also nice that professional and technical is up there as one of the better, higher ones that's growing, because that is largely a foundational point area with the IT industry. You know, when we do our evaluations of the IT economy and so on, they're largely found in either the information sector or the professional and technical sector. So there is some IT growth that must be behind the professional and technical gains that's going on there. Is it to the same level that you might see up on the Wasatch Front? I doubt that. But it is nice to see that forward-looking, growing, futuristic, so to speak, part of the economy is taking a hold here to some degree in the local area. This is the employment distribution. This goes back again to that Hockman Index thing where I said about the distribution. The statewide is the brown. If it was equally employment distributed and to get like a 1 on that Hockman Index, all of Carbon County, the blue lines would equal the brown lines. But they don't, and you can see the areas of your own specialization. Mining jumps out, you can see education, you can see healthcare, You can see some other areas. You can see public administration. Now, education and public administration, I put 2 red lines on there. Education can be an area where you're not really reaching out and grabbing money from somewhere else and bringing it in and priming the pump, so to speak. If this room was an economy, education oftentimes would be just passing money to each other without putting more money in all of our wallets. Except when you have a university, like you do here, which could oftentimes bring people in from the outside. So that red line from there below is largely the employment or the share within higher education here. Again, with public administration, if it's just a lot of local government, again, you're just passing dollar bills around to yourself. But if you have federal government employment or higher levels of state government employment, you can be pulling monies in from outside of this region in terms of salaries and so on. And so the red line over or below the red line is state and federal government employment as a share of all public administration employment. So, in other words, I'm saying that what oftentimes can be just local industries or actually have components of export or exporting dollars into the area, or I guess I should say import. Importing dollars in, exporting a product, so to speak, is what it would be.
So basically, there's a positive economic impact when we have state and federal jobs
versus a neutral
here versus just local.
Another way to look at that industrialization is with this slide. Again, this is that Hockman index is kind of, sorry, these are location quotients that are here. In other words, if this industry was a share of total Carbon County employment employs as much as that industry share at the statewide level, it would be 1.0. Anything over and above 1 shows where you specialize more in an economy or in an industry than the statewide average, and you can also see other areas where you don't have as much employment as a share of total employment as the statewide average. And it shouldn't be surprising that you get a large jump there at natural resources at the top, which is mining. You can see utilities is really high also, but out at the far end of the bar charts themselves, you can see the amount of employment. It's only 119 employment, whereas if you look at manufacturing, maybe its share of the local economy isn't as big as it is at the statewide level, but it's 308 employment versus 119 in the utility sector. And again, you can see that public administration employment that shows areas where you have strong gains. Education, again, sometimes is passing dollars around. Healthcare can be that way also. Although, when you do have healthcare, as you see here, that is over and above 1, that has a ring to it that it's more of a regional healthcare than just a local economy healthcare. So you must have, obviously you have the hospital here and so on, and you must be reaching into other areas of the rural community and so on to bring some of that activity here. And so that, again, acts as a net economic gain area.
And just on this slide, from a county perspective, and we'll be talking about this in a little bit, where do we want to focus our education and training to industries that are in demand? And so which of these industries do we want to focus on that are in demand, so to speak, within our county? And that'll be one of our discussion items in a minute.
Yeah, and you could look at some of these and say, well, I want some of these areas to be bigger and so on, and that is always worth evaluating. The question is, will the private sector, so to speak, or will the greater economy itself find a reason to come here? Oftentimes, industries and these patterns develop because the private sector and the profit sector says, I can make something happen here. If it's not happening that way, then the only other alternative is to incentivize it or jumpstart it or see if you can incentivize it. And oftentimes that's not possible. But it is, understanding at least where your strengths are, and then either trying to grow something else if you think it's possible, or focusing on what you do have that's strong and giving it more emphasis.
You know, I think across the state you'll see some of these things that weren't possible before as far as growth in specific areas, specifically because of the opportunity zones that are now being located throughout Utah. And we'll talk about ours again, and specifically what we're going to look to target here in just a minute.
Sure. And again, when you do talk about those opportunity zones, again, that's where I'm talking about areas to try and stimulate the private sector to take another evaluation or look at local areas by incentivizing them to come in or to do something. Economies evolve through time. You can see Brown's the year this is all Carbon County employment distribution, year 2000, 2008, 2017. You can see that as mining has lost its share of total employment, something's filling the void or would step into the void, and you can see that healthcare has increased its share of the local economy. You can see some other smaller areas have done it, like transportation. And this is just a picture of how the economy has evolved a little bit over time. So naturally, as you're getting a situation where you have some job loss, you're going to end up getting some labor force loss that goes along with it. You can see the flow here, the graphic on this one. The labor force, again, this is measuring only those who are active in the labor force. The unemployment rates, as they officially are only those who do not have a job but are looking for a job. And not casually, it's like basically, you know, you've been looking for the last month or so is the official unemployment rate calculation. If you don't have a job that you haven't looked for a while, but I take one, that you're not in the official unemployment rate. So I'm saying with this labor force loss here, it's one of two things. Either people are still in the area and have just given up looking for work, or they've actually left the area. I can't tell straight up from that particular slide. It's one of two things, but the overall picture here is, though, that the labor force levels are naturally pulling back if the job counts are also pulling back. Maybe this is a way of answering it a little bit. Here's actually the population count. You can see that the labor force probably started declining sooner than this population arc took a downward turn, but oftentimes if there are job setbacks, people don't immediately leave the area. They may stick around to see how things play out, and if it doesn't, over a longer period of time, doesn't work in their favor, by then they might move on. It can take a while to sell houses and so on, those kind of things. Carbon's population age tree. Again, it looks a bit like the rural one overall. You get these jaggedy looking things. Oftentimes that is survey, I don't want to call it error, it's survey noise, so to speak. Because these are coming from the Census Bureau does a survey every year of the entire United States economy, and not a census, but a survey. It's American Community Survey is what it's called. And so this probably has just some sampling size. The smaller an area of sample, the more you're going to have noise, as we call it, in the sample size. But again, we're showing that same kind of rural pattern of high amounts of older population, not as much, so to speak, in the base. Well, the base is there, but then there's that thinning out in those middle years, those prime working age years. The gender employment, male-female counts here. You can see male counts were higher, but they're converging, but that largely is a function of this. In terms of male-female employment in the various industries themselves, you shouldn't be surprising. What is it? Men are from Mars, women Venus, whichever planets are which. But the moral of that story was we're not exactly the same. And so you can see the male tend to be heavily into natural mining, the construction, manufacturing, wholesale trade, the transportation industries. On the other hand, females are very prominent in the education community and the healthcare community, and some other ones. I know when we had the Great Recession hit, it was a very, very male-centric setback. It hit the construction, manufacturing, the durable goods industries, the brawn industries, however you want to classify them. Whereas education and healthcare in the state of Utah didn't lose any jobs. They continued to grow because they're so sensitive and are dependent upon the local population itself for who they are. So when the Great Recession hit, and people may have lost a job or something, they didn't stop educating their children. They didn't stop going to healthcare if they needed it, and so on. So those are industries I guess you can almost go so far as say as they're recession-proof, but they are definitely very sensitive to the local population itself. Employment by age, a little bit, again, naturally you would think, as I showed that earlier age tree, it's a little bit older population here, so you've got more in that older 55 to 64 area. I tried to see if there was any industries themselves that might be real sensitive to this and people retiring in mass, and the closest I could get here in Carbon County was the public administration. But again, that's all of that various forms of government employment, whether it's federal employment in the BLM and the mine safeties, whether it's state government in Workforce Services, Department of Transportation, so on and so forth. You can look at this as one of two things. This is either something to worry about, or it's actually an opportunity. Because oftentimes I work for the government, and I know I'm maybe 5 years away from retirement, and I went to a retirement seminar a year or two ago, and I was kind of keeping my head down and not paying attention to it because I didn't think I was taking care of my future the way I should have, and so on. And I came out of there saying, man, we got a Cadillac pension system here. In fact, I felt I probably shouldn't have done it because I went through most of my life not thinking about retirement, and when I saw how good that looked, I couldn't stop thinking about retirement coming out the other side. So suddenly every day seems longer than it used to be because it's like, hey, retirement looks pretty good. But the point is, these are government jobs, and oftentimes they have some good pensions and retirements with them, so that people could easily retire, stay in the area, and need those jobs to be backfilled, which could be an incentive for people to actually come into the area to fill those jobs, versus people losing or retiring out of these jobs and then leaving the area. Mining employment, prime age there. Average annual wages are actually kind of losing track or slowing down in terms of keeping up with the statewide average. There's some spikes there in the Emery County stuff, but that's oftentimes when they go down and do some reverberation work in those power plants. It kind of spikes the wages. Taxable sales. I'm a labor economist, so I don't speak greatly to taxable sales, but you can see the employment change from year to year in the taxable sales. You can have gains, you can have losses going forward, but you don't want large losses, because even a gain the next year doesn't mean you get it all back, or you get back to taxable income. You can see where each county ranks on the county rankings. Emery County, let me go quickly through here again, kind of the same picture, job losses, labor force decline that goes with it. Again, population decline that's coming out the other side also. Employment distribution, again, different diversifications here, heavily into the utilities, heavily into mining. Here's the areas of industrial specialization if you want to take some time later. I assume a copy of this presentation will be made available. Employment by age, a much older population in Emery County. In fact, if you look at Emery County utility employment, almost half of the employment down there is, looking at retirement within the next, 5 to 10 years. Again, is this an issue or is this an opportunity? I guess it depends on how you look at it. Gender employment, again, the same concept. Female employment in the education, healthcare, a lot of male employment in some of the other areas. Let me close it out with, well, what's going on now? What's available? What jobs are what is here and what's being advertised? We subscribe to a service called Help Wanted Online. These are job advertisements. They scrape all the job boards out there, all the way from Craigslist to corporate job boards. And this is the last 90 days. These are unique ads, not repetitive ads and so on. These are unique ads. And so you can see that there's about, a year ago there was around 600, now there's about 550. You can see them distributed through the different counties. 483 are full-time, 118 part-time jobs. You can see this is probably hard to read, but I've got the list of the current employment that's being asked for. The highest ones there: heavy and tractor-trailer truck drivers, registered nurses, construction laborers, and so on. Over on the far right-hand column is the general education requirement. As we observe these occupations, what the general education requirement is to get into them. And not surprisingly, and this is the same in almost every part of the country you go to, higher education is not the dominant jobs that are being asked for.
And just to point out what you're saying here, we're going to have a technical training and an education degree seeking conversation here in a minute. And as you're pointing out here on the Help Wanted, so people who are hiring here in Carbon and Emery counties, that it just looks about only maybe 20% are degree seeking job openings that we have in demand here in our area based on the online Help Wanted advertisements.
And if you were going to go up on the Wasatch Front, it might be a little bit higher, but not much. Most of the jobs around the whole country are not high education asking, so to speak, jobs. These are the employers that are represented in those Help Wanted online job advertisements and their quantities. These are the major occupational groups that are showing the most: transportation, material moving, so on. These are the major occupational groupings within this, and it was asked for the largest employers in the county: Carbon, Emery. And to finish it all up, a little while ago, we kind of came up with a scorecard, so to speak, just to give the county's rural areas really some kind of perspective. I've got the first column there is the name of the counties themselves. The second one is, are they rural in density? Yes, they are. There are counties at the bottom: Box Elder, Juab, Morgan. You would say that they are rural, but they're actually part of the metropolitan areas by official definitions. What areas have low economic diversity? You can see again, the ones that have an X do have, certain counties have recent job setbacks. Do they have labor force decline? And are they part of that high unemployment measurement that I did? And unfortunately, in terms of X's across the box, you can see that both Carbon and Emery are in that category.
Very good. Well, Mark, we appreciate that hard work and that study. It's important to have good data when making decisions. Now that we have that data, we're going to turn the lights on and have a little bit of a discussion. I have some university folks and some business folk and Price City Mayor here with me today on the panel, and I have some questions. As far as the next 10 years here in Carbon County, Gina, you were very instrumental with this Lewis, Young, and Birmingham study that we did. What are some of the opportunities or industries that we should be looking for according to this study?
So according to the study, so one of the issues we obviously want to look at diversifying our economic base. We want to increase the economic diversity index that you see there. And in order to do that, we need a workforce. And so the light manufacturing, medium, heavy industrial manufacturing, according to the study, would be the ones that make the most sense because we have high unemployment and we need workforce for those new jobs. And so you need to retool and retrain the people who are out there looking for jobs, for future jobs.
You know, and let's make it specific a little bit. As we noticed, there are several, from the online advertisements at least, there are several job openings out there right now, today. And, you know, several of them that actually go unfilled. Yet, from some other numbers, we commonly in rural areas retain very few of our high school graduates to stay and live in our area and work in our local workforce. Brock Johansson with Emery Telecom, could you talk to us just a little bit about, you know, some of the struggles in getting some of the people who live here, go to school here, who are kids here, getting them to come back and work here for your business? Well, first, tell us how many people you employ.
We hang around 100 employees.
Okay, so around 100 employees. And tell us just a little bit about some of the hiring difficulties that we might have here.
So I think you kind of break it into two, and this data is all new to me. I hadn't seen this report, but we have we have kind of two separate types of jobs. We have those that require a 4-year degree. Those are harder for us to fill, honestly. And we hardly ever have success. A lot of times we don't even have applicants from the area. We'll go and recruit from the colleges out of counties and try to bring those in, and we'll put, it's kind of hard to bring people back. The most success we've had is to try to get people directly out of the colleges that aren't already anchored in some other, you know, they already got jobs in Utah County or whatever. Once they get those jobs, the wages are usually higher up in Utah and Salt Lake County, so to pull them down here is kind of hard. So we try to grab them right out of college. And then we have the general workforce that doesn't require a 4-year degree. We usually have a lot of applicants for those because it just depends on if the mines and the power plants are hiring. If they're hiring, then we don't have a lot. If they aren't, then we can usually fill those.
Okay. All right. Well, this kind of actually segues right into a handout. I don't know if that's the right way to call it, a summary of the Western Pathways Conference. And everybody here in the room, you should have those 9-10 pages. It talks about the 6 essential strategies for creating effective state career pathways. I'm going to switch our slide to that right now. And in this conference, there was a large participation from educators. And so I don't want anyone in this room to be offended by any of the data that is presented here, because this data was put together by educators as well as by CEOs of Fortune 300 plus companies. There's a group of CEOs who meets together on a board to address career pathway issues nationally. And so in this, I have highlighted just some areas that we'd like to touch on and go over. And sometimes, let's see, can we see that? We can see that, good. So the 6 essential strategies for creating effective state career pathway systems. This correlates with our local workforce study because a career pathway is a streamlined effort through education and training into employment. We've identified that we do have several job openings here in Carbon and Emery counties that go unfilled that are difficult to fill. I think if we talk to any employer here locally, sometimes they'll have a job opening for 6 to 9 months before they find that right person. Or sometimes they just, oftentimes we have employers who are expanding their businesses outside of the area for the simple reason of not being able to find the talent and skilled labor force they need here locally. So how do we address those issues? This is not just a local conversation or a local obstacle or an issue. This is being discussed nationally, and what are some of their best practices and suggestions that we can implement here locally? That's the discussion. So oftentimes we devote a lot of money towards education, but sometimes not towards career development. And you would think that those go hand in hand, and they should. There is perhaps, because of a lack of effort and funding and money that goes towards career development, students end up staying in school longer, sometimes 6 or 8 years before graduating with a 4-year degree, because they change majors, they change fields, they change what they want to do. And we can see through here that there's a lot of recommendations on how to help students earlier on through work study, work-based learning, internships, apprenticeships, kind of understand what field of study they want to make a career out of, and help streamline that education and training process. I've only just highlighted a few items of point here. In this, the 6 essential items that they're talking about is prioritizing career development at a state level. But I'm not saying that we need to wait for the state. We can here locally, because we do have a certain degree of flexibility, make some of these efforts. And I know that Superintendent Lance Hatch, the school district in Emery County, the charter school, they're all making great strides and efforts towards career pathways and coordinating those efforts with the university. But the 6 items that they identify here is prioritizing career development, strengthening career pathway programs, scaling up work-based learning and business engagement. So this is more employers' influence in the schools. Scaling up work-based learning is hands-on learning and field classroom experiences, instead of just in the classroom, but actually on a job site to see what it's like to learn in person, rather than just theory. Creating more equitable programs and policies. Now, this is largely a state item. How do we make some of those disproportionate opportunities available to everybody on a more equal basis? Building an effective state career pathway system, and in there you'll see that oftentimes is derived regionally first. And so the state will implement best practices of areas within Utah that are doing really well, and then they'll say, hey, the rest of the state should do this. And that doesn't mean that we can't start that here in Carbon and Emery counties. And then creating a more effective paradigm, and we'll get into that. So one misconception that a lot of people have is, hey, I should not worry about what I want to be until I'm in college. But they're finding these corporate Fortune 300 company CEOs felt that this needs to be a discussion had in middle school and in high school, that it needs to happen sooner in junior high. And that moreover, there's a shortage of robust pathways. Now, if we take a glance at the state CTE program list, it is very, very, very extensive. But when they talk about a robust career pathway program, that is something that is applicable to your local employment opportunities within your region. And so sometimes the state list doesn't necessarily meet the needs of what is in a specific region, especially when we're talking, as we have discussed, the tale of 2 Utahs, or the urban economy and the rural economy, and the different challenges and obstacles we have here. Here they have some recommendations of what the states can do. Develop a high school plan before students enter the 9th grade. Have available data systems that show pathways, internships, employer opportunities that are available. Now, recently, 2 areas in Utah have done this. Wasatch County, I'm sorry, not Wasatch, Weber County, and down in Washington County. And Gary, I don't know if you want to talk to that any. What they did is it was a combined collaborative effort. DWS coordinated with school district individual. They actually hired somebody between the 2 entities that coordinated with all of the community jobs that offered internships and apprenticeships, and many of these were paid, and they made it a central website that was used as a brochure for their community, that was used for students in junior high and middle school, to where they could see, if I want to be an electrical technician, this is what I should be doing from earlier on. And it was a community effort. Weber County did it a little bit different than Washington County, but both have their pros and cons. And something like that from a state database is in conversations right now with the Talent Ready Utah core team. They're trying to decide, do we approach this from a state level first, or do we support the regional efforts and help more communities become like Washington and Weber County, to where they can collaborate amongst Department of Workforce Services and the school districts and the employers. Many people miss out on opportunities simply because they don't know they exist. Gina, I don't know, you kind of looked like you had a comment there. You know, I mean, how many of us here in Carbon and Emery counties, I see Mark Holyoke in the audience, how many of us know about the career opportunities leading into the hospital? And the hospital does a better job of advertising those than perhaps many of the businesses here in town. And so if somebody wants a future career at the hospital, if somebody wants a future career as a registered nurse, what are their pathways? Which schools offer them, and which programs exist here locally? Where do they need to go, and what do they need to do to enter into those? And so making this available in a very transparent way, to where a 7th grader on their own, or a mother with 3 jobs, you know, can help their child navigate these. We need to get away from it being so difficult, to where it can be very transparent and easy. And that's one of the best practices that has been recommended by this group of CEOs, as well as everybody else on this committee that put together these recommendations.
Commissioner?
Yes.
I know some of that's being done, and I'd have to have Ryan Sharp here for Emery Telecom, but I know we get about 7 or 8 interns a year. And so that's coming from the community. I'm not sure if that's coming from working with the school districts, or if it's coming from working with the college, or both. And we try to place them where their interest is. So if they're in, if they like CAD or something, they'll go into engineering. If they like running heavy equipment, we got them out on the heavy equipment. If they like more business and accounting, we put them back with the accounting. If they like writing, we're putting them out with ETV 10 and letting them help Shannon. So I think some of that's happening in the community, and maybe this group doesn't know that it's happening, but I think there are counselors. Well, I know they're shoving us quite a few. We have about 7 or 8 a year interns, and that's a lot, and they're paid interns. And I think I've got 4 or 5 on staff right now. So I don't know, I'm sure some of the other employees are getting them also, but we're getting them pushed to us, and we try to match them with you know, their interest. And I think we have 5 on staff right this summer, and we'll probably have a few more come on. Seems like we have a few come in late, but we try to help with that and put them where they have interest.
So with those interns, do they stay with the organization? Do they continue on to college? Or?
Usually we encourage them to get, usually they're college students, and we encourage them to go to college or to go to trade schools or whatever, get more education. Sometimes if it's a place where we are short, we'll actually offer to pay for their education. So we have a couple that we're paying through we have a couple that we're paying through SUU. We got one student that we're paying through USU right now, and we'll actually pay them to get their degree, and we work around their schedule so that they, for instance, our warehouse, when we needed another accountant, so we put him as a warehouse accountant. He's taking some classes through USU, and we worked with his schedule, and that's an example that's happening right now. So we'll work with his schedule, but that's not all of them. I mean, if we got a shortage in an area, we might say, hey, we're interested in paying for your extra education if you'll agree to stay on. But a lot of times they just come for the summer. We ask them, what are your interests? What are you studying? What do you want to see in the organization? And sometimes they want to bounce between different sometimes they'll go and sit with the accountants. They'll be like, this is too boring. And sometimes they'll go sit with somebody else and they'll say, this isn't for me either. I mean, we had somebody that came in wanting to look towards more business, and we put him in the business. He's bored silly, and so we finally ended up putting him on the outside, and then he ended up starting his own business, not in the counties. He moved, but he started his own business, but it was more outside construction type stuff. But before, he had a complete different idea of what he was going to do. And when he started the summer, it was just not a good fit. So we see that, and we know the school districts and this college are working with us on those placements, because I don't handle them directly as the CEO, but I know Ryan's getting those from somebody. I'm seeing him at the building walking around, so they're coming from somebody.
Now, Brock, that's a great example, and like you said, you're not alone. There are several local businesses that are participating this way, that are working with the university. The additional step that Washington and Weber counties have taken, if I were to move here, Brock, and let's say I have older children that are juniors and seniors in high school, or let's say I was considering moving here. I have a job opportunity. Do I want to bring my family to Carbon and Emery counties? Can I easily go online and see what employers locally in one place, so I don't have to go to your website necessarily, or even the university's website? Is there one centralized location, and this is what Weber and Washington have done, where you can see all the employers that participate with internships and apprenticeships, so I can say, hey, if I move here and take this job opportunity, I know my kids will have work-based learning through internships and apprenticeships with any number of these participating employers.
I think that could be developed more. The difference in, and you got to remember this, is it's not that Emery Telecom is going to go advertise these interns, because we're really doing it as a service. They're not actual positions we're advertising for. The counselors will come to us and they'll say, we've got these students, can you find places for them? And so we're not going to go advertise these, because it really isn't a need. We kind of, we actually at the first of the summer always meet as managers, and we say, all right, there's going to be a bunch of interns come in. What jobs can we do with them to give them some meaningful experience? But it's not active positions that we are advertising for. We just bring them in because it's a good thing to do in the community. So, but I think, yeah, it could probably be advertised better. I don't know if we're not going to go and advertise, all right, we need 7 interns. We'll wait and have them placed here as they're needed. And so it's not, those positions we're running before, usually there's summer help, the kids are coming and they've got semesters off and they want some active work experience during the summer. We operate fine without them in the non-summer time. So they're not active positions. We're just creating positions for them to give them experience.
Very good. You know, and that's...
But we could probably do better at having a central location. And again, I don't know if it's there or not. I just see them after Ryan brings them on. Ryan Sharp's our HR manager.
You see the interns there in your office, Gary.
Yeah, I was going to say the process in more rural castle country, as we call it down here, is much more organic than you're seeing in Washington County or Weber County. I know both school districts have what we would call workforce development or workforce educators that are leading that, whether that the guidance counselor is wearing part of that hat also. I know at Utah State, here at Price campus, we have a director of the intern program. We're a little bit more organic, and what you're mentioning in Weber and Washington County is something that is not necessarily branded into the school district or the applied technology college or in an employer or even DWS. It's more of a neutral site, and that is something that we potentially need to grow toward. So the process will remain organic with a company such as Emery Telecom willing to accept people kind of wandering in saying you got work for us or not, but at the same time it'd be great to have that centralized clearing. So that is something that Janie Connor and I are writing down, how to get that to the next level for the community.
You know, and it will be a multi-front approach.
Yeah.
You know,
not single branded, you know, U-state type things. It's got to be neutral.
Exactly.
So I'm interested with Emery Telecom. Do you have students that work with you year round or just in the summer? I mean, do we have students that do work-based learning throughout the year?
Would you please come to the mic? I apologize.
Well, I can repeat what she said. So she said, do we have students year-round, or is it just summer? And no, we'll have more in the summer, but we have students throughout the year, and a lot of them, frankly, ETV 10 is a great part-time job, and a lot of them want some time writing anyways, and so we'll have, I mean, in addition to those summer interns, we'll have 2 or 3 on staff throughout the semesters, it seems like, with other things, and we try to work with them and give them that experience. I know we had one this year that we kind of put as you might have saw some of the advertisements, but he was waiting to, we put him in as kind of a geek squad because he likes the IT side, and so we had him in January, and he did that whenever he had time, and it was a good fit for him. That's what he liked to do. And so, but that wasn't during the summer. That was, you know, but we don't have, it seems like there's more in the summers, right? Because and then in addition to that, we have some part-time employees that are students, you know, that they'll either be customer service reps or they'll be writers for ETV 10. That's in addition
As an
to that.
educator
That's
or
not
principal.
interns. That's, you know, part-time employment. We have those. All of those are paid. Even our interns are.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Now, we are in the section of the meeting where we do want public participation from those in the audience. Please come to the mic so that when people watch this online, they can hear what you're asking.
Great. Well, this is more of a comment. So it's something that we've learned from nursing. And what we've learned since 2010, the Center to Champion Nursing in America, who I'm employed with, have been working on developing the pipeline for nursing. And what we learned is that the way to develop a rich pipeline is to start in middle school. We're too late when we're starting in high school and doing the internships. While they add value, if we're really going to make a difference and we're really going to get these people who want careers in certain aspects, we need to start early. We need to be present in those schools. We need to mentor, educate, and create programs all along the way. So by the time they're in high school, they already have a CNA. They already have their career plans, their prerequisites, all of that done, which helps develop that pipeline. And I could see where that would translate to any other type of job as well.
You know, you could have been a speaker at the Pathways Conference. I mean, seriously, you touched on exactly what they said. And on this handout, I'm just going to dim the lights. That's actually the last item that I highlighted. Not only engage business and industry, but then to get things started in middle school, which you just nailed. Let me go ahead and play this. So again, this is recommendation to the states that we're going from. These are 6 essential items for career pathways, but that doesn't mean we have to wait for the state to do it for us. This tiered systems is a software developed by a local principal here in our community, by Micah Salas over in Helper. And this will help make a big difference as far as intervention for those students who are falling behind in one area or another, or who have a intervention should go both ways. What if a student is excelling in a certain area? If you have a classroom, how do you give that student the additional attention they need to continue to excel? So just a brief overview of this.
As an educator or principal, it can be difficult trying to implement flex or intervention time into your school. Not anymore. Tiered system support transforms and elevates how schools track skill mastery and even attendance during intervention. Using the Tiered System Support website, teachers can align interventions with Utah State Core Standards and track student progress. It is the only commercial product that not only lets teachers assign students to specific interventions, but allows students to choose their own interventions if needed. The helpful scheduler lets educators assign students to flex or intervention time, and the student interface provides full visibility into where each student has been placed. See how tiered system support can help you overcome logistical challenges with flex and intervention time today.
So again, that was developed, and just recently, she's showcasing it at a principal's conference next week. But something like this, I think in my mind, could go so much farther. Anyway.
Well, I want to say Melissa Swenson's in the back, and she's developed a similar type thing to get into the mind of the 9th graders, Melissa. And if you would come to the microphone to say something or two, she's our
Yes.
local guidance counselor extraordinaire at Carbon High School that I get to work with, and she lets me in her office occasionally. But your product is similar. It's experimental, I realize, in development, but talk a little bit about how you're reaching down into the middle school.
Well, and this kind of came from a meeting we had with Joe, you, Tyler, all of the group. The thought was that students as early as 7th grade would like the student and the parent to be able to sit down, go through what we have available. Because when you're talking about those pathways, those CTE pathways, we can't provide all of the classes and all of the training for all of them. But right now we can complete 19 pathways on that CTE pathway list, and there's 55, I think, different pathways right now. So what I did is I just came up with a Google Doc. They did it, the counselors in the middle schools actually gave it to their 8th grade students, all of their 8th grade students. I've had about 260 students go through it. And what it does is it basically allows them to, by using Utah Futures, which is kind of tied in with all of this stuff, they can determine what area they may want to go into. They can select that, and then it does give them a 4-year plan and says these are the classes you need to take in order to complete this pathway and where you can fit them in your Carbon High School graduation 4-year plan.
And that's wonderful. I mean, that's what they're asking us to do.
Right, and I'm actually presenting at the counselor conference next week with that. So
Wonderful.
I'd be happy to share it with you. It's fairly easy to use.
And I think what we should be doing is sharing this information.
And I want to say that I think a lot of what we need to do in the high school and in the middle schools is really beef up our work-based learning program. Because at this point, we do send kids out to the hospital, to all these different places to do either job shadowing or some work study, as we call it, for a couple of hours a day or a couple of hours a week. And a lot of times, Nicole Still was just telling me her daughter did some internship or CTE internship with Pro Rehab, and they have called her and asked her if she wanted to work part-time this summer. Mm-hmm. So it does really translate into that kind of stuff. But we do need to do some work and connecting the community with the high school a little bit more, a little bit better. But I can, that's,
yeah.
And we've worked, the college, we've really worked well together to promote some of these things. So,
In fact, recently the university has a career pathway success story with Intermountain Electronics of sorts, at least at beginnings. There have been many discussions for years with them, and recently Jimmy Kanu was able to present these 4 CTE programs with Intermountain Electronics, but under the discussion of understanding this doesn't meet all of their need. And how do we work together to fill that 20 to 30% of additional stuff that needs to happen before they're hireable?
When you're talking about bringing some of those programs, Intermountain Electronics did come and do a lunch and learn at the high school. We had Brainstorm out of Provo come in, and I sent out an email to students just last week. They have 4 summer remote internships available. So those things went out, so we need to, at the high school, I can see some things we need to do, so.
Yeah, so we're doing some things.
We are.
And it's very exciting because this is important to spread the good news of what we're doing.
Right.
Commissioner.
Thanks.
Thank you, Melissa.
I was going to say that. I think that a lot of this I think we're doing, and it's just getting the word out. And I talked to Gary about this yesterday, because I've sat down, I wouldn't know some of this is happening, except I have a 9th grader that was an 8th grader, that was a 7th grader. I've sat in those meetings. We've talked about our pathways. So I've seen it firsthand with my own daughter. So I know it's happening. we've been in the schools for those presentations that you're talking about, you know, come over and we'll send people in to talk about jobs in the tech fields, and we've done the work studies and those, and so they're happening. And I was talking with Gary about this yesterday. A lot of it's about letting the community know what's out there, and it's really marketing what is out there and what the school district's doing, what the college is doing, what the businesses are doing. And you know, we're not telling the story very well. I think it's happening more than we know. It's getting that out. And I'll switch hats from Emery Telecom to ETV 10. I said, you know, we need to be running some articles on this and saying, all right, what are the positive things that's happening in the community? And I said, look, I'll send the crew over. Let's talk to the college. Tell us what the positive things are happening. I'll send them over to the school district. We'll talk about what those are. And to the point about getting a 9th grader or a 7th grader, I think the counselors are reaching out really well to the students. We need to do better education to the parents, because a lot of times the parents, neither of them have a 4-year degree. They're not thinking about that. They don't have certificates in any training because they came out and those mine jobs were hot. They went right into the mine. And I had a conversation with a good friend of mine, and I said, well, what are you doing to save for college? We haven't even thought about saving for college for our kids. And their kids are the same age as mine. And they're not, because they came straight out and the mine jobs were hot, they're not thinking, okay, well, what trade school or what college or what certifications does my child need to actually get a job in this harder economy? And so I think we're reaching out to the kids, and I know that parents are supposed to be at those meetings, but maybe media-wise we need to market a little bit better.
Brock, in regards to that, just real fast, my eyes have been opened a lot in some of these state meetings that I go to for the career pathways and the talent ready and all of that. When I say they've been opened, it's helped me view my community through the eyes of someone else, through the eyes of someone who's new to our area, who doesn't know our area very well. And they say, oh, you're from Carbon County, so are you a coal miner? They don't know what else we have here. And also the people who live here oftentimes don't know what else we have. And so you're spot on in what you're saying as far as communication and getting the word out. You know, some people are ahead of us, some people are behind us, but let's strive to implement those best practices as we receive them and tailor them to fit us, because this is not a cookie cutter program. We're not just because it worked for someone else doesn't mean we don't need to tweak it to make it work for us. So I appreciate your comments there. Please come to the mic, and Mark, feel free to come on right after.
I just had a comment relative to that. Is there something on a state level from a state tax that could incentivize these kind of internship programs and not have it be just a voluntary thing that you kind of work in? And because there's liability insurance issues you got to be mindful of. There's child employment restrictions that you've got to be mindful of. Perhaps there could be a state tax incentive that gives you a credit for your company for adopting a particular internship type of arrangement. That way there won't be so much reluctance to have a 14-year-old running around your plant as there might otherwise be.
Well, very good. Well, just to respond to that, so later this month, and this isn't announced yet or anything, but we're going to be having the Economic Development Director from Salt Lake County, and they've developed a database that becomes very transparent, so all of any interested company thinking of developing an area will know what the benefits are of that specific area, and kind of like a baseline benefit, and then kind of a range of what they could potentially negotiate based on numbers of jobs and capital infrastructure and such. Also here on the screen, I'm going to show you, I went to Washington, D.C. and learned a little bit more about opportunity zones, came back, we were successful in getting the governor's approval, and right now it's sitting with the Treasury Department over in D.C. But this is our outline, our carve-out, our census tract for an opportunity zone here in Carbon County. It includes much of Ridge Road and a large section and swath of what is eastern Carbon County, including the airport. And so what you're saying, we can talk with this fellow who has experience managing 92 different community development areas in Salt Lake County, and talk to him about what can we do here locally amongst the various taxing entities, Carbon and Emery counties. What can we do to incentivize businesses to locate here and then ask them to give back, so to speak, in potential scholarships, or will you help people meet this gap? And this is a brand new business. We don't have a current program, but can you help us meet this education training gap and what we need so we can organically help you produce your labor force? That's what we want. We want them to hire our kids. We talked about how in the next 10 years, 50% of the workforce will be made up of millennials. And what are we doing to prepare our community to hire through education and training, make them eligible for these future job opportunities that we are going to have out here in this opportunity zone? We currently have investors from New York and other places interested in companies that have expressed an interest or are in the development stage of opening up a business in this opportunity zone. And so what are we doing as a county and as a community and as educational institutions to prepare our children and our local labor force through retraining, retooling, and helping them get the skills necessary for those employment opportunities? One of the senators from back east eloquently said that for rural and economically disadvantaged areas, there won't be anything more impactful than getting an opportunity zone as far as future growth and increasing the average wage within your community. So that's very exciting, but there's a lot that we need to do as far as marketing our area and meeting the education and training gap. And I keep saying education and training because some of it is a 4-year, 5-year, 6-year degree. Some of it is technical education.
What designates an opportunity zone? I mean, why did they pick east versus price?
They went off of a specific census tract, off of the 2010 census tract. The Association of Local Governments, which we both sit on, was charged by our governor with presenting 2 areas out of the 4 counties that we are in. What designates the gold line? Well, that's a higher level conversation. But basically, we were successful in getting the governor's approval on this section right here. And it's right now sitting with the federal folks for them to confirm that we're all in good standing. So we're pretty excited about that. Mark, yes.
I just wanted to piggyback on some of the comments from Danelle and also from Melissa. In healthcare, for many years, we've done internships. And I know Gina, Danelle can speak to that we have students coming into our clinics and into the hospital on a regular basis and have a great partnership with the college with this. One tangible thing that I'd really like to challenge us to do is we've got to get, starting early in middle school, but we've really got to get where students in high school that want to go into a healthcare field really can graduate from high school with an LPN. And so I think that's a career path that can happen. I served on the UNM Basin Applied Technology College board for many years, and we had several students that graduated from high school with an LPN. And so right now that's not happening, and so I really just challenge the powers that be, and we will definitely be a big part of that to make that happen. We have to raise our own. As you can see, healthcare, I mean, we continue to increase the services that we provide here in the community, but in order for us to continue that path, we've got to raise our own and have the workforce necessary and catch them before they leave. I loved what Gina has mentioned as she's worked on the strategy is we get our youth that leave the area and then it's hard to get them back and they just have to have jobs. And so in healthcare, we have jobs for them. So just a challenge there to get us to the point that we can, through career paths, through high school partnership, that we can get them the courses that they need before they even graduate from high school to be an LPN and then move on to other healthcare fields.
I totally agree with that. Another thing that I'd like to charge us with too is when we're thinking like in middle school age ranges, we need to be thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. A lot of these kids who need to get into the workforce are not going to have strong parental encouragement. So we need to be thinking, yes, we want our parents involved for the parents that can be involved, but how are we going to be inclusive and empower those students to take that career path on their own? So I'd like to keep that at the forefront of our mind.
For sure. I mean, we have a intergenerational poverty population here, and it not only needs to be so simple that parents can help their kids, but so that those kids can also help themselves. And that friends and family members and people can intervene and be a part of that solution. Here in Carbon County, we actually have pages here on these desks to the side because we have various committees formed to help spearhead some of these efforts. And it has been referred to as Gina's group or whatever. Locally, through this study that we had through Lewis, Young, and Birmingham, we decided that some of these efforts, these economic development efforts, need to be driven by pillars of our community, local citizens, and business owners, because politicians, they come and go. But we need somebody to maintain the momentum and to push that forward. And so when you hear of Gina's group, this is our economic council of sorts with people from the community spearheading each effort. And so we invite all those who are here to look at those and to, if you want to participate and be involved, to sign up and be a part of that solution. Here we're presenting obstacles and talking about solutions, what we're doing, what we need to do. And we're not going to make it through all of this information, but it's exciting that we can address these issues and that we can get together with people who are ready to move now and make a difference. One other item, we have an obstacle to employment for a specific group of people, and this is partially affecting the intergenerational population, but not necessarily specific to them. It is very difficult for somebody with a record, with a criminal record, to get employment anywhere. And so we have been working with the university, we have been working with the public defenders, and we have a meeting scheduled with the judges here soon to discuss how can we implement through the sentencing process an educational certificate program in lieu of drug court, in lieu of jail. And if they successfully complete this program, have their otherwise would-be record expunged. And so this helps align some of our training issues here locally, because we're helping them become more qualified, more eligible for employment, and at the same time trying to help through recidivism improve their chances of being gainfully employed and benefiting our community and our society. Many of these people, you know, through one thing or another, just a simple possession charge can keep them from being employed anywhere. We have a population here that needs to overcome that, and we're making efforts towards improving their situation and their ability to be employed. And so we are looking here in our area not only from the middle school up, but for those adult education, adult training, and meeting the gaps through the entire spectrum. Now, Jed, I didn't know if you were just really agreeing with what was being said, stretching, or if you had a question or comment.
Yeah, comment.
Please come to the mic. Now, Jed was actually up at the Western Pathways Conference with me. He's from Emery County. Would you introduce yourself?
Yes, Jed Johnson, secondary supervisor at Emery School District. And just through the pathway, one of the things that I think is probably one of our most powerful opportunities is the opportunity that we have of creating better partnerships. As I listen to Brock talk, I think of all the things that we could do together more effectively to help our students and also the whole population. If we were more willing to meet together and discuss, and the frightening part of that is we have policies, businesses have policies and practices, and it's hard to get around those things. But if we take the opportunity to actually listen to each other and take advice from each other and respect the things that we could do, I think we could open up the opportunities greatly for adults and our students. DWS would be great to invite them to those partnerships, so we're all working together to build on those, as well as our community leaders, the commissioners. We've had the opportunity of meeting with our commissioners and getting their input on some of the things that we should be doing. We have a great partnership now with USU Eastern, and we meet monthly with them. But I think the one weakness that we have is actually inviting our business partners and letting them know that they're our experts also. Sometimes we think, oh, the schools are the experts at all these things, but businesses have the expertise and the knowledge and some better ideas that we may not be using, that we can share those things with all of our schools. This year we're actually sharing classes with Green River from Emery High that we haven't done before, because Green River, their teachers, one teacher in particular, I think he has 16 different classes he has to teach during the year. And so in a small rural area, we don't have all the teachers that we need or the expertise or endorsements to be able to teach all those. And I think we can reach out to our business partners and get some expertise, and I think they would be willing to share some of their people with us and helping us to share some of the knowledge and content and also the expectations that our local businesses have. And I think all the businesses are pretty close of what their expectations of us are, but we as a school district need to understand those and then work with each other. And I think that's probably our greatest tool, is we know each other. We're small enough that we can actually work with each other and other businesses and pull everyone in to make us more powerful. I know we tried for with the medical center of getting a Talent Ready grant. And they did that last year here in Carbon County, and we joined with them to try and get that, and it was denied. And some of the things that we do as a rural district, they say they're for rural districts, but they go to the larger districts. And I think as we develop those partnerships with our businesses and with our local governments and with our community members, that will strengthen what we're trying to do and maybe be able to bring some things down here that we haven't had before. So, thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just add to the fact that right now we have an environment. Let's talk about the state school board. I've had several conversations with various members on that board, and there's an atmosphere of flexibility that hasn't existed before. More than willing to hear what we would propose as solutions and to help us, because you talked about how there's some of those details that we have to try to work out between the employers and their rules and regulations, our rules and regulations, and everything else. Right now, people are willing to hear what we would suggest as far as solutions and make exceptions. There was conversations of if we needed it, because it's sometimes hard to have an internship and apprenticeship with these high school required core class courses. But, why can't a humanities, arts, credit, whatever, be covered by a college GIS class? And credit usually hasn't gone the other way. You might get college credit, but will it cover a core competency class in high school? Now they're saying, well, just ask us and let's see if it makes sense. Let's talk about it. Let's make sure that certain things are covered and we'll sign off or whatever, Or a
certification with
yes, exactly. Get a certificate. Yep. So those are all very exciting things.
Commissioner, can I add to that? I know a telephone company in the state that they're actually the school didn't have people to teach class, and they're sending people in, I think, to teach a film class and an IT class. And I know we go and help a couple schools with their film programs, but yeah, I think that those opportunities are there. One other thing that that's been touched upon a little bit, but I want to talk about one other pathway, and I don't want to get shot here, but I'm going to bring up something. Jed, you can put your gun away. Sometimes I feel like we have our pathway is our pathway to Logan. That's what our pathway is. It's to Logan, and then, like Mark Holyoke said, we don't get them back. And I think I was listening to Mark's presentation on money bringing into the county, and he said education's a wash unless it's the college. And so sometimes I wonder if the community ought to get behind an effort to get additional funding for USU Eastern to add more four-year degrees down here, get some more professors, because my understanding is a lot of the professor count has actually dropped. But if we could get those four-year degrees down here, they're going to hire a professor one way or the other. They're going to hire him in Logan, or they're going to hire him down here in Price. Well, the governor's got a 25K job initiative. Let's hire the teacher down here, and let's not send our students up to Logan to where they'll never come back. And then I wonder if there's two sides to that. The college does a really good job of associate's degrees. Can we get more professors down here so we can offer a four-year degree in education or business or RN four-year degree? Maybe that would help the college. But then on the other side, how do we get those certificate programs where right now they're on a semester credit system? How do we get them back to the 8-week programs? And so I think we ought to do some lobbying to help increase the size of USU Eastern. They are a pretty big economic driver down here, and that's not a wash. Like you said, that if we get more professors down here, they bring their money here, their salaries, but then students stay here. Well, they're buying telephone lines, they're buying internet lines from us, and they're buying food from you guys, they're buying health services from the hospital. And so, I think that's another thing that we ought to be lobbying to increase the size and go to the governor's office and say, look, you got a 25K jobs initiative. And it's not just with the college. It's, the government, the Utah government talks about increasing rural, but they all their employees sit in Salt Lake.
Right.
That drives me crazy.
Yeah.
And let's move. There's very few communities that have better fiber connectivity than Carbon and Emery counties. They can move the jobs here, and we can telecommute them.
Yep.
I mean, that's just a fact. And so I think we need to lobby the governor's office, lobby the legislature, and say, move your jobs down here, including the college. Don't go buy 10 more professors at Logan and transport all our talent up there. Give us 10 down here, and the two high schools will feed them to get their four-year degree or to get their certificates. Because right now, it's really an associate's degree. We need better certificates. We need better four-year programs. We need to give the college more money. No pathways to Logan.
Brock, those are, sometimes people avoid the hard conversations, but those are the critical conversations that we need to be having. And right now, the governor does have this 25,000 job initiative. They want to hear our recommendations. So we need to show up, and we need to bring this to their table.
And a few of you were in the governor's office when I told him this to his face. And I've had numerous conversations with Linda Gilmore, and I've asked for a meeting with Bolger, is that his name, that's over that. But we need to have an honest discussion about that. And I'm willing to have it. But I've already had it, but we need more people to have it.
Right.
Yeah.
Mark says he's on board. Very good. Now, and that happens in so many more ways than you would realize. EDC Utah is a nonprofit that helps point companies thinking of locating in Utah or relocating somewhere else in Utah to sites that are applicable to their needs. Right now, they've actually started a rural approach. So one of their first places is Ephraim City. They're meeting with the city manager, and they're going to go through everything that they can do for that location and community to maybe make them marketable to all of these other companies that they present. So when a company says, you know, this is what I want, they say, okay, this community meets your need, but however, you may not have thought of this, and then they're going to start presenting all these rural options in conjunction with what the companies originally asked for. So that is a new approach and a fresh approach that has come about because we are at their table asking them and telling them, would you tell people about Carbon County? Would you tell people about rural Utah when they're asking for what they are asking for? And so again, sometimes it takes several approaches. Sometimes it takes one or two. The important point that I'm trying to make is that we show up and that we have these critical conversations as many times as we need to until something happens, and that we get the right data. Our sales pitch is always more convincing when we're basing it on data that other people cannot refute. So I do have a few more things to go over, but I was just wondering here on the panel, are there any closing statements that you'd like to make to try and wrap things up?
I have a couple.
Please, Gina.
So when you caught me thinking and you thought I had a comment, I was thinking you were talking about discussions at the state level. And I don't know if you want me to go down to that microphone to give you a charge, but I don't think we should wait for the state. Like, we need to be doing this yesterday.
Yes.
So let's get as much done as we can, as fast as we can.
Let's get ourselves organized, and just as you've done with the 4 committees in the Economic Council that we're going to have, let's get people who can drive the bus and move it forward.
Yep. And then I would say, just maybe for Gary, back on the point about internships, we have interns that we have high school students that job shadow. We have interns. I've been approached by the Hope Project to have formal internships next year. I'm terrified because I want them to have a good experience. I have no idea how to do that. So if you could, I think you would have a much higher success rate with employers if you could tell us what we need to do so that students have a good experience. And there's, like I've been on, there's an internship.com that gives you some guidelines, but everyone I know that's a small business owner would be more than willing to have the student there. But then it's kind of, what do you do when you get there? For my husband, it's easy. They follow him around and they love it. For me, they watch me do accounting and they're like, I'm never going into that. So some help on the employer side with this would really be, I think, effective in expanding these programs.
It definitely would be, yes. And again, that just becomes, that comes back to how can we make it easy for employers to participate? You know, and I've been in the same boat with interns that I think I have at least 2 interns every year, not as many as most, but at the same sense, the easier we make it, the more people are going to participate. So, very good point. Mark, I don't know if you have a few last words for us?
No, other than I empathize with what you were saying in terms of the decisions come out of Salt Lake, you know, and people sit up there, and that's why I facetiously at the start said I came down from the ivory tower.
Yeah. Well, that's important that we include people from the ivory tower. Jed, last comment.
Yes. Just from the legislative point of view, for those who have interns, they have opened that up a lot better. Where risk management will take care of those kids when they're in your employ, and so that was a real stumbling block before that I think is a very good direction that they have taken in providing our risk management to.
For those who don't understand, explain risk management.
Okay, that is our insurance carrier, and so when those kids are an intern with you, then the school district is accountable for them, and if there's something that they do that they get hurt, that isn't something they shouldn't be doing, but then risk management will take care of that.
Well,
so.
that, you know, definitely will help a lot of employers that would be providing work-based learning.
Yes.
In a variety of trade fields.
Right.
Jed, does that cover even like job shadowing? Because that's been one of our concerns. Is you get we almost, if an employee says I'm going to bring my kid on this job shadowing, we have to almost redefine his jobs for the day.
Right.
Because we can't have those kids on a highway working on the side of the road next to a pedestal and then riding in a truck. And so we have to redesign everything, and those kids come to reduce the risk. And I mean, obviously we're going to keep them safe, but
Yes.
it's almost like push them towards office jobs because we're so afraid of them being in trucks, being around equipment.
Yes.
So,
And so, yeah, that's a real positive note.
Yeah, that is.
And then, of course, the 18-year-old for driving trucks and those things are still in place, EMTs, those kind of things. But as far as working with you, you have a safe situation for them, then yeah, that's very positive, especially as we work with our business partners. So that's one thing the legislature has done this year that has really helped out. So.
Very good. Appreciate it. Thank you. And so, you know, we have some obstacles. We have some potential opportunities here. Carbon County, I believe the last numbers, Zach, you can scratch your nose at me if I'm wrong, but I think I saw a chart somewhere that we're up 240 jobs from last year. We'll have to verify that number, of course, but things are looking optimistic for Carbon and Emery County as far as opportunities on the horizon. But what are we going to do to completely to facilitate local employers and to meet that educational and training gap between what graduates currently have and what they need to be employed? This is going to be an ongoing conversation. The State Department of Workforce Services has discussed at their general board the possibility of implementing after the one-stop shop offices, actually having local area career pathway committees. And the Price Department of Workforce Services was the first one to have their one-stop, so we'll likely be the first one to have that career pathways committee as well, assuming that the state approves that and sponsors a local charter.
Maybe final comment. I know when you're talking about the pathways and so on and what some of the other areas are doing, you know, you got a touch of it going on here with the healthcare industry is, you know, that you give kids a vision in high school and they start working towards something, and what they learn in high school, that's credentials, go into the higher education system or the ATC system, and they're already that far along, instead of, well, what you did in high school, you know, was nice, but it doesn't count towards your credentials or certifications. You have to start afresh with us. It's not what they're doing. You know, obviously those pathways are such that they're building that European model where you start in high school towards something, you get credentials, you move on beyond high school, and you're already that far ahead of the curve, and it may lead on towards 4-year degrees and so on. And yes, you want to do those to within the industries that are already here and need support. Sometimes though, opportunities, it would really take a lot of courage to do something like that in an area of need where you might not have the businesses here already. And I don't know if it would work or not to educate them and then the industries will come, or if that's too risky. But one that comes to mind is throughout, again, I showed you that Industrial Revolution, and that had machinists and tool and die makers and all this kind of stuff. And I grew up in manufacturing Pennsylvania, and I'm a baby boomer, and I left to come out here skiing, but watching it from afar, I could see that industry's decline and what our fathers and grandfathers worked towards and were fine with. My generation didn't want their kids to do that. Don't do that stuff. Go to high school or go to college, get away from this declining industry. Well, that pendulum has swung too far over the last 30, 35 years, where some of the most in-demand jobs up on the Wasatch Front are the machinists, the tool and die makers, and so on. And I know that because too many people talk skill shortages when, as we evaluate them as economists, if you pay them, I bet a lot of them will come. But the ones where they pay well and they're still not getting what they want, that's cha-chings to us as problem area, skill shortages. And I'm seeing a lot of that up there in the what I would call production occupation areas. You know, many people aren't aptitude built to go to college, but they are production aptitudes and so on. And they're coming up short across not only the front, but the whole country. So if you build a machinist program here, again, it might be more students in it than what you currently have, but would it bring businesses here to take advantage of it? I don't know the answer to that, but that's just, I'm just throwing that out as dialogue for the future.
Definitely. You know, and I think as a summary of today's discussion, economic development from the community, from the county, will be holding hands with DWS, and will be married to education, both degree seeking and non-degree seeking, certificate seeking, so that as to fulfill the demands and needs of our local employers, so that we can organically grow our workforce and retain more of our children here in our community, because there are job opportunities for them and career pathways streamlined into those job opportunities. So appreciate everyone for being here. Appreciate all the panelists for coming up here. For many of you, this was very impromptu, but I feel like sometimes we have more of those critical conversations without so much preparation. And I appreciate everyone who's listening in today online. Thank you, and we'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting.